here. And it was felt here in Central Ohio. In fact, a moment ago, some people reported up on the administrative third level, people felt the building shaking. The earthquake, is a result of the earth doing what? Rotating? That's what produces the earthquake? Anybody else? Yes. The moving of the plates, the earth plates, the crust of the earth moves. Well, let's get to a more basic question. What happens when the earth plates start sliding? The earth starts shaking and quaking. He used the word quaking. But I want to know what happens to the building. So I have a few questions maybe you guys can help me with. I have a model here that will help us understand what happens to structures during an earthquake. So if you would just imagine, these are three different buildings. Skyscraper, a building much like COSI, probably 3 to 4 stories, and a single dwelling house, small building, ranch home. Skyscraper, mid-sized building, and a single dwelling house. Now the earth shook 2 o'clock today, and some people upstairs said they felt it. So the earth shaking, it doesn't always shake the same way. We measure earthquakes by intensity and frequency, how fast they go back and forth. So what happens to building? I will simulate a earthquake when the earth is shaking really slow. Sometimes earthquakes happen like that. Watch what happens, maybe you can tell. Slow quake. So that's our skyscraper. So if the earth's frequency is very slow, look what's going to be affected. If you're in a skyscraper, can you imagine what that probably feels like? Now, my colleagues told me they felt tremors on the 3rd level. This represents the 3rd level, sort of a 2-story, 3-story building. Notice what happened to that level when the earth was shaking with a small frequency though. Was it moving much? If I find the right frequency, what do you think will happen? Now this is a really cool science. Notice that the other structures are barely moving. So, not all buildings behave the same during an earthquake. It depends on the nature of the quake and the frequency of the earth. Barely shaking. Very good. So, what would I do to make that single dwelling house shake a little more? Make the frequency faster. That means make it go back and forth even faster. So, if you're living in a single dwelling home and your house is really rumbling all over the place, that probably means the earth is really doing this. Notice what happens to the other 2 structures. They are barely moving. Everybody catch that? So, if the earth is shaking at the right frequency, structures will be affected in different ways. Single family dwelling, when the frequency is like this. Multiple dwelling, 3 or 4-story buildings, when the earth is shaking like this. Skyscrapers and the other dwellings are affected. When do skyscrapers get affected? If the earth is rumbling with enough intensity at a low frequency, notice the other 2 structures. Not affected at all. Now, what determines how the earth will shake? The ground you're living on. Sand, hard rock, and where you're living, that will determine the nature of those frequencies and the kinds of dwellings and how they build. And do we build different kinds of buildings on different surfaces? Yes, that's architectural science, and we'll stop right there. Thank you, Professor.
All right. Yay.